Hello everyone, I am Mukherjee, a student of Chennai Law College and currently interning with LEXIS and Company. Today I am going to talk about the rules of interpretation. We know that it is very important for any advocate or lawyer to understand the rules of the interpretation of a statute because it is subject to ambiguity. Sometimes it happens that the language is not very clear on certain things. In that case, there can be a confusion regarding that matter. A particular statute provisions may have certain places where it is capable of having two meanings. In that case, we know that there arises an ambiguity. The courts have to interpret them to make best use of the act. Secondly, there are certain provisions where the acts are not very clear. The act is not providing a clear vision or a clear view on how to interpret the statute. In that case also, the interpretation of the statute is very important. If we want to do an interpretation of a statute, we have to first understand what is the basic difference between interpretation and the construction of a statute. Basically, the interpretation of a statute is when we try to understand the law or we try to understand the meaning of the law with respect to the intent of the legislature. On the other hand, construction is something where we draw conclusions from the statute. We are trying to draw conclusions from the intent of the statute, from the words of the statute and from the meanings of the statute. Hence, both of them is not the same. Interpretation and construction have certain differences in them. Now, if I talk about who has the responsibility of the interpretation, only the judges have the right of the interpretation. Nobody else can do the interpretation, but obviously the advocates are given the chance to present their interpretation before the judges and the judges can take the final call. There are various ways of interpretation. The basic rule starts with the literal rule or the strict rule of interpretation. The literal rule or the strict rule of interpretation is where we actually go by the bare letter of the law or the words of the law. We are not concerned about the intent of the legislature or how the legislature wants to interpret the law. We are not concerned about it. We are only concerned what exact law speaks about. It is a very strict interpretation and the court will restrict it only to the letters of the law. For example, in case of a taxing statute, we cannot go beyond the letters of the law because it has a universal application and it has to be same everywhere. But in certain cases, we will get to a liberal interpretation. Now, where can we go for a liberal interpretation? It is when, if we are focusing on literal interpretation, the strict interpretation, it is leading to an ambiguous situation or an absurd situation or a situation leading to a lot of confusion. In that case, to avoid confusion or absurdity, we utilize the liberal rule of interpretation. Now coming into that place, we will actually have the golden rule of interpretation, in which we think about what is the intention of the legislature, how the legislature wants to go about it, why was the act enacted, and what should be the actual purpose of the legislation. Why was this legislation acted, and it should obviously act for the betterment of the society. For example, the Consumer Protection Act's provisions has to serve the best interest of the consumers. If it is interpreted literally, it may happen that it is not doing well for the customers. It has to serve and balance both the interest of the manufacturer and the consumers. In that case, the golden rule of interpretation is very important thing. The golden rule of interpretation is a midway between the literal rule, the strict rule of interpretation, and the mischief rule of interpretation. Now, what is the mischief rule of interpretation? The mischief rule of interpretation was actually said in the Hayden's case. In the Hayden's case, we found this new rule. In this case, we actually want to know that what was the old common law, what was the mischief in it, and what is sought to be rectified, and how this new law is trying to rectify this mischief. These answers will lead us to the mischief rule of construction. This can also be called the purposive construction, because if there is a certain requirement, the mischief rule will serve it. Also, we will talk about the harmonious construction. When a particular provision of the legislation is capable of having two very different meanings, then the court will get to a harmonious construction and want to get a midway out of both of it. Other few interpretation rules are there, but I would like to name specifically the aegisdom generis, that is of the same kind. Sometimes the court interprets the words of the provisions seeing its atmosphere of the surrounding words and interprets it in the like manner. The interpretation is very important to understand the soul of the law, because we cannot actually have forgotten the thing that the laws are made in a particular time, but its application goes out for years and years, and hence the interpretation will actually form the backbone for the entire country. That's all for today. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you and have a nice day.